Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Nomadland. This film was directed by Chloe Zhao. Frances McDormand, who stars in the film, actually bought the rights, I think, to the book, and she persuaded Chloe Zhao to come on board to direct it a couple years ago, I believe. And I know now it's generating a lot of awards buzz and it's getting a lot of critical acclaim, though for me, while I was watching it, I was moved at times. I think it certainly had its moments that I was pleased by. But for some reason, as I was watching it, this film just never came together in a way that really felt like it was harmonious, in a way that really affected me. It just wasn't gelling. And the more time I had to let it kind of marinate in my mind, the more glaring those issues with it that I had became. Thing is, I love the type of art, whether, a movie certainly works really well, but it could be a novel, it could even be an album where you use a road trip or, being on the open road like that as the framework for the way that you discover your protagonist's identity. It is the perfect framework for that kind of self-discovery mission, I think, for having a personal odyssey, trying to find a sort of transcendence beyond our existence. And the thing about it is you've got an open road in front of you and behind you. It's like there's no beginning or no end, and that can sort of, be a little bit trippy at times, like that reliance on yourself. Man against nature, it's a very daunting thing at times, and, it really puts your significance as a human, I think, to the test. It's just perfect for the narrative format. I personally love being on the open road more than almost anything in the world. I just love it. And I've driven through, some of the places that Fern has. Fern is the main character here, who's played by Frances McDormand. And, I was really hoping that this film would inspire me in that way creatively. And you'd think it is, like just while watching it, it does capture the essence, I think, of that authenticity. The cast and crew basically lived a sort of nomadic lifestyle where they were living out of their vans. They were really traveling from place to place in these locations to shoot, really exploring the American landscape, but also it uses actual nomads in the film throughout the movie. I think the only professional actors here are Frances McDormand and David Strathairn. And you do have to admire that to a certain degree. Submerging yourself in that lifestyle really does help. And yet, ironically, I found myself looking at this more kind of Italian neo-realistic approach that they're going for here. And while it may feel authentic on the surface, and it's touching on authentic moments, it rarely goes into the depths of what it's really like, to live that nomadic lifestyle. It's the flavor without a lot of the real substance, without a lot to really sink your teeth into. And thus I always felt kind of a disconnect. I felt removed from the characters in the film. And the story itself left a lot to be desired for me. And I think without a lot of the meat of that, a lot of the authenticity of the rest of the film just sort of falls flat. The story, I think, really has to have meaning and it has to work for the rest to be able to sing. What's going on here is they're wanting to make a film that is very much like a docudrama. It's a movie that's supposed to be, as I said, like a neo-realistic piece where you have real nomads in the story and real locations. And it's meant to be a commentary in part on the recession and the repercussions of that throughout the American West. But it just doesn't really explore it. We never really get to see or really experience the true despair and the desperation that comes out of these types of sacrifices. There are, as I said, hints of it here and there. The flavor of struggle without really getting to experience the struggle. Like the real repercussions of hard manual labor like that, especially when you are in your older years, when you're in your 60s. And, there are a lot of things that I wish we could have seen more of. There's a lot of seedy, kind of dangerous types of people that you meet when you're on the road like that. But it felt like they were trying to glorify a lot of these people indirectly. It's like they're showcasing their quirks like they're on full display for us, making it seem like they're all very quaint types of people who are happy to help a neighbor. And yes, that's absolutely true. Like I've been on, many, many road trips in my life. And yeah, a lot of people out there are willing to help you. They're very kind. They're very interesting types of people. But I've also seen some shit. And I think that, this movie could have benefited from showing a little bit more of that, a little bit more of the ugliness and the darkness mixed in with that beauty to make it more fully rounded. And a lot of the nomads in the film, they're given these sorts of, like these monologues where it's meant to be a sort of reflection, a meditation on their own lives and how that can sort of inform Fern on her journey as a story device. And yet I felt like the writing of it really reduced the Nomad experience into these snapshots that were very compartmentalized, and they felt more like they were there to evoke sentiment. Like it's consciously presentational in a way that just feels really false to me, or it rings false. And again, it's ironic because these are real nomads. How are you going to get real nomads in their real lifestyles, in the locations in which they live, and yet I don't feel it. I'm just sitting there feeling like everything is very scripted, and it turns them into a novelty, which I find to be kind of disrespectful to them. And I know what they were trying to do, but I just wasn't a fan of the execution. This film, I think, it's going for, or I should say it's similar to films like The Florida Project, for example, directed by Sean Baker. And it's similar in structure as well. Like, the second half of the film for that film is really where the story starts to take shape, and it's the same in this film. But with Florida Project, you really feel like you knew these characters just by sitting there, having the camera linger on these characters and not really judge them in any way. That felt absolutely authentic. Whereas this one, I felt like the camera just kind of goes from here to here to here, and it's not really lingering on anything long enough for me to feel, those textures, to really capture who these people are. And then there's another tone that this film is going for. So you have like a couple things going on here, and that would be that it's going more for a more cinematic approach, where it's much more poetic and meditative, and we're really getting these gorgeous shots of the American landscape. And this is where Fern is kind of accepting her call to adventure in, I'd say, the second act of the film, where she's really rediscovering that identity, and it's almost like a rebirth. So it does feel very much removed from reality at that point. And yeah, as I said, when you're on an open road like that, especially for a long time, things do get pretty trippy, and at least for me they do. And I often have a lot of really kind of intense introspective moments, and you sort of find yourself transcending to a degree, because you have this sense of freedom. And that can be really, really beautiful if you let it, even when you don't have very much at all, very little, in fact, in terms of material possessions. And there were parts of that I liked. There were parts of that I found very nice, and certain subtle moments that were, where nothing really is happening, that I was pleased by, especially when there's no dialogue. I wanted more moments like that. And the moments that are there, I wanted them to be more full, just more complex emotion, like amidst this breathtaking landscape, the nature at times, it can be all-encompassing and religious, but it can also be very cruel and very brutal on both your body and your soul. And I wanted to feel all of that blending together, especially through the imagery, so that it feels more bittersweet, more layered. But as it stands, as I said, you've got two conflicting tones here, the more kind of realism, the docudrama stuff, and the more kind of, semi-political commentary. And then you've got the more cinematic, meditative sections over here. And, that's fine that they exist in that way, but I wanted the emotions at least to connect. Otherwise, the whole film just kind of feels disjointed. And that lack of being able to blend those things together makes the film feel very, again, compartmentalized, where it's like, here we're going to show you some of the unglamorous moments, but just a hints of them. Now we're going to show you, but it's also really beautiful here too. Oh, but we got to remember, we've got to show you that it's, difficult as well. So it felt very kind of staged, very self-conscious, and rarely did it ever feel like it was taking any sorts of risks or dangers, especially in the themes. I look at Easy Rider as an example of a really good kind of road trip movie, maybe one of the better ones of its time, I want to say, or at least, of popular film classics. And I think why it works so well is because it does have that depth. It really is exploring that self-discovery, that identity, in a very, very different way than this film, but in a way that is very unique and beautiful and original. But there's also a major brutality and a darkness to it, and a sense of existential angst, all through the framework of this open road. And in this movie, Nomadland, there's a real lack of character development for the main character, especially in the first half of the movie. And some might say that works to the film's advantage because it's kind of a slow boil, so you don't really get to know that much about the character until the second half, when her story starts to take shape. But is it though? I don't really think it's a slow reveal at all. I think that Fern is just naturally a very reactionary character. In the first half, she's reacting to all of these different colorful characters around her in ways that are written very schematically, that don't really challenge her or push her or reveal any progression into the next half of the movie for her character. So therefore, it just doesn't feel very earned. It's more like bulleted themes that are being checked off that she's reacting to. And then when it progresses into the second half of the movie, that's really more where the development begins. But by the time we get to that point, I don't feel particularly emotionally invested. And I do have to bring it back to Florida Project because, as I said, really spending time with those characters in the first half through observance and just kind of lingering on everything, almost like you're a fly on the wall, really allows us to experience the full breadth of these types of characters. That way their characterizations can be put to the test in the second half. And Fern, in contrast, just doesn't feel as developed or as even as a character. Now, don't get me wrong, Frances McDormand is wonderful in the part, but she's wonderful in everything. She is a brilliant, brilliant actress, and she brings kind of a wild kind of spirit to the role and a childlike vigor, as well as kind of a wise, contemplative quality. She's just so brilliant at that, and I think it was good to kind of bring that childlike innocence to the character. Childlike meant to, I think, symbolize kind of a second reformation of that identity, much like a lot of young people experience as well. Yet even as well as she's portrayed, I feel like even in the second half, I never really get a sense of who she really, really is. We do get some insight, at least on paper, about who she is and why she has made certain decisions, and we get to see a little bit, you know, of her background. But, you know, it's all very much kind of condensed into this very forced dialogue that's laying everything out for us on the surface. And a lot of the characters in the movie love to pop up at very convenient times that really aren't very realistic at all. And even though this movie is going for such realism, it's very forced coincidence as a way to kind of, again, push the story forward in a very devicey sort of way. And I really wanted to get to know this character. I wanted to know how her perspectives were shifting as she was experiencing all of this. How has she grown organically? How has the environment shaped her? It has very little to say about the things she's conflicted about, her pain, her fear, her dreams. So yeah, there's just a lot of surfacey sorts of things that are going on here. And, you know, like I said, overall, the movie is trying to touch on the political, but it's also trying to avoid a lot of the cautionary trappings that go along with that, but also bring out kind of the more reflective aspects of confronting nature head on in that way. And I think in order to really lose yourself kind of in the artistry of something, especially if you are the writer, if you're the creator, I think you have to free yourself kind of that judgment, whereas this film seems to want to constantly shape the narratives very consciously, shape how we view these people. It wants to have its hands in everything. And in the process, they water down a lot of the thematic elements. So therefore, a lot of the things that it wants to touch on, you know, like the politics and such, it really doesn't have much to say about in the big scheme of things. And the final scene, spoiler alert, you know, she's in an empty house, and then she opens the back door and walks out into the countryside. And, you know, I mean, it's fine. It's very simple, but it also, in a way, felt kind of like a labored metaphor that sums up the next stage of her life. Like it's a kind of a quaint postcard. And it just doesn't make me feel anything interesting. It feels like it's kind of summing up the whole thing as an in conclusion sort of thing without really developing it or giving me anything to take away from it as I leave. It's trying to be moving. You know, I think, it reminded me a lot of that final shot in Brokeback Mountain, if you recall that, but, you know, with none of the pain and the resonance of that moment. So yes, overall, this movie, it wasn't offensive to me by any means. You know, it was just, it felt very safe and very much kind of consciously for awards season, with none of the real grit or the risk, the exploration of the mind and the body and the soul in the way that I really like in art, especially art like this. This movie felt like a movie that my parents might have dragged me to on a Sunday afternoon at the Angelica movie theater when I was maybe a teenager. And, you know, that's just not really my thing. Those sorts of things I tolerate, but, you know, I kind of forget about it pretty quickly. But overall, yes, I mean, even though it had its moments, I don't think I could quite recommend it. But that's the review, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to start off by plugging my website. I am a starving artist, and if you like to support artists, I sell commissioned portraits and prints of my work all on my website, deepfocuslens.com. I have the link for it below. If you're interested in a commission or a print and you have any questions, you can certainly email me below, and I'm happy to talk to you about it. Also, here are my Patreon supporters. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a patron, I also have a link below that, as well as all of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.